Good day to everyone. On behalf of Director John Alder at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. Body-worn camera implementation, learning from the FY2015 BWC Policy Implementation Program site. My name is Denise Rodriguez, and I am the Project Manager of the Body-worn Camera Training and Technical Assistance Program. This is another in a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA for the Body-worn Camera Technical Assistance Program. We thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for its investment in the Body-worn Camera Grant Program and the Body-worn Camera Toolkit, and in a range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies implementing body-worn cameras. The Bureau supports state, county, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies in many, many ways, and we are grateful that they do. The U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Justice Programs, Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, launched the Body-worn Camera Policy Implementation Project, or PIP, in FY2015 to assist law enforcement agencies with the enhancement or implementation of body-worn camera initiatives. This webinar will showcase the progress and lessons learned from 3 FY15 BWC PIP sites. Representatives from San Antonio, Texas, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Elgin, Illinois police departments will discuss their reasons for implementing body-worn cameras, the importance of developing a comprehensive policy, how they overcame implementation challenges, and how the BWCTTA was able to assist them in this process. I want to now turn it over to Pat McCreary from the Bureau of Justice Assistance for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Denise. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. As an Associate Deputy Director here, I oversee the body-worn camera program along with the program manager, John Markovic, and it's just in my role today is just to provide a very brief BJA body-worn camera update. As Denise mentioned, this initiative has started now for a number of years. It began in 2015, and at that time we realized body-worn cameras were becoming popular and used in all kinds of agencies throughout the country, aimed at improving public safety, reducing crime, and also trying to improve and advance public trust between police and the citizens they serve. BJA announced a $20 million body-worn camera program, pilot, PIP at that time, and in May 2015 tried to help support the immediate needs of local and tribal law enforcement organizations. In 2016, we continued the program, adding additional 60 sites and additional $20 million in funding. And with the 2017 awards, it has significantly expanded to a total of 83 agencies, bringing the 3-year total to 262 awards and over 51,000 body-worn cameras being implemented. As we work with kind of a broad range of diverse agencies with different sizes of departments, we've learned there is no kind of one silver bullet to program implementation success. But I think as you hear our presenters today, they'll illustrate, even though there are some challenges and impacts, there are some really clear rewards based on research and just evidence that we're seeing across the country that if a body-worn camera is implemented carefully and with deliberation that includes community stakeholder engagement with the prosecutor as well as other many stakeholders in each community. If thoughts are really given to policy and training kind of review and improvement, it really does establish those agencies to make strong strides in improving relations in the community, better law enforcement protection of officers, and less complaints. So with that, I think you'll appreciate the speakers that we have today. Back to you, Denise.
Thank you, Pat. All right, so before we begin, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. Wayne Alsop has been with the San Antonio, Texas Police Department for over 23 years. He's currently the administrator of the body-worn camera program for the Research and Planning Unit. He was also a key partner in helping develop the SAPD's General Manual Procedure or Policy for the body-worn camera project. Prior to his work on the BWC program, he worked patrol, bike patrol, and traffic and commercial vehicle enforcement. Officer Alsop has also received training and certificates as a TCOL instructor and a Taser Axon instructor. Commander Anna Lally has been with the Elgin, Illinois Police Department for over 20 years. She directs and oversees the daily activities of the Patrol Division, Emergency Communication Center, Jail Operations, Animal Control, and the Office of Emergency Management to include implementation of special projects and programs. Her daily activities include community engagement, technology, media relations, personnel administration, program development, planning, training, budgetary issues, internal investigations, and disciplinary actions along with special projects. Commander Pat Rigdon joined the Colorado Springs Police Department in 1995 after serving as a police officer for the city of Laramie, Wyoming for 4 years. He was promoted to commander in 2012 and has served at the Gold Hill Division and the Specialized Enforcement Division. Prior to 2012, Commander Rigdon served as a lieutenant for the Sand Creek Division and a sergeant on patrol and in the Tactical Enforcement Unit. Commander Rigdon has a bachelor's degree in sociology from Cornell College and a master's degree in criminal justice from the University of Colorado. He has attended the Center for Creative Leadership and the 248th session of the FBI National Academy. All right, so just a few other comments before we start the webinar. This webinar is recorded for the benefit of others who may view it later on our website. There will be opportunities for questions and participation during the webinar, so please make your thoughts and questions known. I can assure you that others will appreciate hearing what you have to say, and if you don't get a chance to voice your comments or questions, please use the chat utility to the right of your screen, and we'll do our best to respond to your input. Please make sure to put your phone on mute by pressing *6, and to unmute, press #6. If you are having any technical difficulties, please message the host by using the utility to the right of your screen, and we will help you to the best of our ability. Following the webinar, you will receive a request to evaluate it. Please complete the evaluation, and please give us your honest thoughts and recommendations. And please let us know what other topics you think we should cover on future webinars. Lastly, I'd like to thank and recognize Dominique Burton at CNA, who does the background work to make sure these webinars happen and go smoothly. All right, Wayne, would you please go ahead and start us off?
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Denise. Yeah, sure, I'll gladly get us started. Okay, see if I can get my slides going here. Okay, well, we're going to get this figured out, Denise. So like Denise mentioned, my name's Officer Wayne Alsop. I've been with San Antonio Police Department for about 23 years, and I am currently assigned to research and planning, one of the body camera administrators. So back in 2014, March 2014, we began researching and testing our current body-worn camera program. We devised a final proposal, which was approved by City Council December of 2015, so about a year and a half later, and we began rolling out just a couple months after that. We are currently fully implemented, and all but just a handful of officers are have their body cameras. Those officers are on extended leave or military duty or something like that is the reason why they can't. But and we achieved that just a few months ago. So today I'd like to showcase some of the challenges and the solutions, and just what we had to do to overcome all of these things during the implementation of our project. So, all right, here we go. So early on, we decided with council that all of our sworn employees of the department would be outfitted with body-worn cameras, including our command staff, all the way up to the chief. So City Council decided later on, because of budgeting concerns and constraints, that maybe that wasn't such a good idea. So what we ended up with was that all uniformed officers and supervisors would have cameras, including all investigative units, with the exception of the non-essential personnel. I'm sorry, that everybody up until then would have their cameras. So because of the budgeting constraints, we changed that. City Council came back and said that we couldn't do it, and that all non-essential personnel and command staff would not be receiving the body-worn cameras at the time. However, the changes would include the issuance of the body cameras to the undercover detectives, which kind of raised some questions. So the new decision was also made to ensure that all of these units having public interaction in some way would have some sort of digital media coverage. So during the deployment of these is where the question for the investigative units came up. And it was discovered that the reality of most of these investigators would just have their cameras sitting idle in the docks and not using them because they don't interact the same way as uniformed officers do. So, in fact, the only time that they would use these cameras would be during an arrest or a search warrant, and that was because it was mandated during in policy to do so. The other option, and this was solely up to the investigator's discretion, was if they decided to do some sort of an interview or an interrogation in the field, they could take their body-worn camera to do that as well. It was recommended that because of this, that these units share body cameras. It would also save money if we did that. Our team recommended that this was not a good idea, that it would cause more serious issues on the back end, such as ensuring the correct people were assigned the correct body-worn camera, or ensuring that the videos were properly tagged before anybody else used that particular camera. So in the end, we just went ahead and accepted the decision to keep it as it was, better safe than sorry approach, and we outfitted everyone, including the investigative units, again with the exception of command staff and non-essential personnel. We also found that training was key to making sure that our officers were going to do the right thing. Our training included policy, state law, case law, demonstrations of the equipment, and hands-on scenarios where the officers would participate with the camera during some sort of a mock call. The officers were also given a written and a verbal test to ensure that they understood how everything was supposed to work. So it proved to be well received by the officers. They actually liked it. And it also proved to be effective in the field. Now, of course, state law mandates that all the body camera users receive training before they're issued and they use their devices. And that's why we added the hands-on approach to take that extra step in learning the laws and the device usage. So, of course, with every new project, there's some challenges. We accepted these challenges as learning opportunities for us. And we were able to take those issues that came up, we assessed them, we learned about them, and after coming up with a solution, we went ahead and applied them. So some of our challenges, probably one of the biggest challenges, was working with the district attorney. We began working with them early on because we knew that their input and their cooperation would be needed to make this project a success on both sides. We were faced with two different types of network infrastructures, a lot of different mindsets on how evidence was shared and transferred.
Thank you.
And, of course, funding issues. So now with us having a cloud-based system in place under this new project, we assume that the difficulties of sharing evidence with the agency, and especially the district attorney, it would kind of be a thing of the past. So our plan was to have everybody sign up under this account with our new evidence management system and begin sharing evidence back and forth very quickly and effectively. And what we learned was the district attorney and pretty much the entire county did not have the same network infrastructure to support the system transfer capabilities. So that just caused a little further issue for us. Had a lot of heated discussions and debates over it. A lot of brainstorming took place. So with the county having their management system and not willing to give it up for ours, and we didn't want to give up ours, we had to come up with a compromise. So we came up with a bridge, for lack of a better term, and it was basically created for both of our networks. So what would happen is the DA would request videos based on case number. We would send the videos with the needed information encoded in it into a county city Dropbox. The county's evidence management system would then take it out of that Dropbox and turn it over to their evidence management system. So it's kind of a middleman for both agencies. It was and it still is actually a workable solution, and it seems to be a happy compromise, to say the least, for both of us. Now, auto tagging, this was designed to eliminate officer input error. Now, our in-car video project, it allowed and mandated officers to input the pertinent information like case numbers, call for service numbers, their employee numbers, things like that. A lot of officers, because they did this manually, would end up fat fingering case numbers, or they entered the wrong information, and some of them just didn't enter any information at all. What we ended up with was over 600,000 videos with either incorrect information or no information, so it was a disaster for us. The auto tagging was when it came online, so far, it's eliminated over 75% of these types of errors in the body-worn camera project, so quite different than the in-car camera project. The program runs smoothly, currently has less than about 1% error of missed tags or no tags for over like 1.2 million word about 50,000 uncategorized or untagged videos. So it's proven to be a lot more effective than the other work that or process that we had. So our policy was another challenge that we faced, and that one was probably the most important one at that. So when San Antonio Police Department first started this project, there were very few agencies with body-worn camera projects. So obviously, policies didn't exist either. So we didn't really have the luxury of using other departments' policies as a guide. So what we tried to do was apply as many rules and regulations from our in-car camera procedure as possible, because it was the quickest way to get something on paper that we could at least follow in the event that something would happen. So what we found was that the in-car camera system and the body-worn camera system functions very differently. We have right around 700 in-car systems and over 2,000 body-worn camera systems. So we'd already begun to see the differences between the two policies. So everything from donning the device, which was obviously not required for the in-car system, to tagging and even uploading the data. It's all very different. For much of the body-worn camera project or policy, we took the failures of the in-car system and redesigned it to be used in our body-worn camera project. Some of the items that needed to be changed or added were things like off-duty use, which was never an issue with the in-car cameras. Officers working off-duty employment would have to wear the camera now as part of their uniform. Calls for service would have to be made for an incident occurred during their off-duty job, which was something new to our officers. This is not something that we did. Apartment courtesy officers' employment was an interesting task also. You had officers living and working in their apartment complex and answered calls. And a lot of them weren't in full uniform, and under the policy that was originally written, they did have to wear their camera because they weren't in uniform, maybe just sort of a dress-down type uniform. The chief didn't like this, and he wanted that changed. So now the officers, whether they wear partial uniform or full uniform, they will have to have their camera as well. Another change was when to deactivate a camera, especially around undercover officers, confidential informants, or crime scene processing. So with the cameras now following the officers everywhere that they went, this was something that needed clarification as well. And new laws allowed officers to view their own videos, report writing, answering complaints, or even testifying in court. So this new policy had to reflect all of the do's and don'ts of that as well. So as time went on, we realized that the whole policy is fluid, and we had to be willing to change. So to this day, basically the majority of officers, they approve of the cameras. And even the initial skeptics, they've warmed up to the project, and believe it or not, they've actually become some of our biggest advocates. Officers that have been cleared from wrongful complaints, gotten convictions in court, and even been able to refresh their memories in a sequence of events while they're writing reports, they prove the project to be beneficial. So, and on the other hand, being able to show the public and other sides of potential controversial event, also use the video footage as a training tool for officers and even cadets in the future. So we don't seem to have it all together. But, sorry, I'm trying to get the slideshow to work again, Denise. It just doesn't seem to be working for me. Okay, I'm sorry, I got it now. So anyway, we don't seem to have it all together, but we're definitely trying. We take pride in the efforts, and we strive to improve where needed. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Anna. Hi.
You're good to go,
everyone.
Anna.
Okay, good. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Anna Lally. So I just kind of want to go over a few things for what we experienced here in Elgin, Illinois, just to give you guys some background. Elgin is located about an hour outside of Chicago. We are roughly 182 officers, and our command structure is a chief, a deputy chief, 3 commanders. Then we have our lieutenants, our sergeants, and our officers. So we're a little bit smaller than obviously the Wayne's department, but we did experience some of the same challenges that he did as well. So the first thing I just kind of want to go over, just for anybody who is starting their body camera program, is just to understand from the very beginning it's important to plan and that this will be a long process. We actually probably took a little bit longer than we needed to, but in the end we realized that it was very beneficial to us because we had worked out a lot of questions that came up and had some direction and some guidance when the questions came up instead of saying, well, we're not exactly sure, and then having to stall on the project. So we actually started our project in 2015, and here in Illinois, one of the things that stopped us from pushing forward is our overhear laws, where in Illinois it's a 2-party consent. So we were actually waiting for a law called the Law Enforcement Officer Worn Body Camera Act to be passed, and so we anticipated that being passed in January of 2016, and we began our planning a year before. So we formed a committee, and we included everyone from supervisors who are non-union to our union members to our civilian staff, and then obviously, to the supervisors and the chief and command staff. So we made sure to make it as inclusive as possible because what you will find is that the body cameras will touch every part of your organization, to our records clerks who fill the Freedom of Information Acts, to our communications staff who it's imperative to make sure that they're entering the calls for service incorrectly because we actually have a CAD interface with our vendor, which similar to Wayne's department, it will tag the video for the officer in the field, which actually cuts down on a lot of videos not being properly tagged. So we made sure to have everyone's opinion. We started doing our research, and then we started with a test phase, and we actually went through 7 vendors, and we included officers in our test phase who had different levels of experience, from the brand new officer who probably would embrace technology more so than an officer who's been here for quite some time. And so we made sure that we had a good cross-section of officers. And we went through 7 different vendors. And I would, for anyone who's starting their program, I think the information you will receive from the officers during your test phase will become invaluable in drafting your policy and along with choosing your camera. So we took our time. Then our law is enacted in January of 2016. We were still working on drafting a policy, which during our test phase, we were working under a protocol. So we actually worked with our legal department to ensure that, we were giving officers clear guidance on certain situations, and we had feedback meetings, every 2 weeks just to hear from the officers of, different types of calls for service or different types of problems that they encountered, and then work that into our final policy. And we then ended up with our first test phase concluding in May, and then we went ahead and issued our request for proposals. We received 15 vendors responded, and most of those we had already tested during our test phase, so we were very aware of the capabilities. And once we narrowed it down to 3 vendors, we did some additional testing, and we also made sure that the officers went out into the fields and not as, not command staff. So me as a commander here, if I go and have a conversation with somebody in another police department from their command staff, it's probably a very different conversation. So we didn't want to hear that. We wanted to actually hear officer to officer and what are the problems, issues, complaints, things that we could do to make it easier for our officers. And so the officers went out and they did testing, and we really looked at battery life and the ease of use. By law in Illinois, we're mandated by certain things. So in Illinois, the cameras have to have a battery life of 10 hours or more. Our law also gives us guidance on when to turn the cameras on, when to turn the cameras off, There's also language in the law that pertains to if an officer reviews their video footage to prepare a police report, they have to put that in their police report that they viewed the video footage. So there's a lot of things that guided us through the law, but then there were a lot of other things that we had to kind of find out on our own, and the test phase, and specifically the second test phase, really helped us to narrow down our vendor. So once we did select our final vendor, the next obviously was to purchase the cameras. We purchased 200 cameras, and then we also purchased from the same vendor a different type of camera for our SWAT team. So depending on, we're currently fully deployed except for our investigators and also our school resource officers. So we're still working through the specifics of how we're going to deploy out to them. Because again, traditionally they're interacting with the public much different than your patrol officer responding to calls. So we're still finalizing that, and along with finalizing our policy, it's been a work in progress. We went through 13 to 14 drafts, and we're still not done yet. We also made sure that we provided training to our officers, and it came in 2 stages. So we deployed slowly to one group and provided them training, and then issued them their cameras, and then slowly through the next several months we ended up doing 4-hour training on policy and questions, and then we also then did a 4-hour block on the camera itself. One of the most important things, especially when you're finalizing your policy or when you're talking about what should be in it, is to make sure that you're having feedback from your union. So I met with our union board several times. At one point they brought the union attorney, and we made sure that we found a happy medium for a lot of things. The issues that the union and most commonly will probably bring up is how do you use the footage for discipline and when it's minor discipline. And also one concern of having supervisors who will just go and look at videos somewhat fishing to see if they can get someone in trouble. So we were very receptive to listening to their concerns and making sure we implemented something in our policy where we talk about random reviews and audit trails, and that gives the officers a level of comfort. But had we not had those discussions in the very beginning, that could have turned out something probably very differently. So we really listened to our union and supervisors and had feedback. We talked about, making sure at the training that if there were any questions or any situations that we worked through those discussions and tried to give as much guidance as we could. So currently we're full deployment except again the SROs and the detectives. And again, for us here in Illinois, we do have certain things that are guided by the law. We also issue a body-worn camera to each individual officer, and depending if they have a take-home squad, we also may issue them a second camera. So that way if they are, responding from their home, that they have the ability to take a camera home, as long as they're docking the camera and any evidence on the camera before the end of their shift. So most of when, here in Illinois, when the officers wear it is when they're in a law enforcement related encounter activity, which would be your traditional traffic stops, search warrants, calls for service. And then the camera does not have to be on when they are alone or within the presence of another officer, report writing, or performing any type of community engagement or community caretaking function. And to that, one of the most important things, too, that we recognized here in our implementation was making sure that our community was very aware of what we were doing with body cameras. So here in Elgin, last year I think we had 7 external citizen complaints, and so our citizen complaints are relatively low. So for us it was more about embracing the technology and being ahead of the curve and making sure that we were trendsetters here in Illinois, because not many people here in the Midwest, the body cameras are not as used as on the West Coast or on the East Coast. So for us it was just making sure our officers knew that it was more about embracing the technology and also how they can utilize it to better their cases, for evidence, for the adjudication of their court cases as well. So we also made sure that we stressed to our community that, even though these officers have body cameras, that everything is not necessarily captured. So An officer's response is based on many, many different circumstances, and the totality of those circumstances drives that officer's reaction. So we did community meetings, community events. We utilized social media. When the cameras came in, it was something as simple as taking a picture of the box of cameras and saying they're here, and letting our community know. We went in front of our city council prior to the purchase of the cameras and made them aware that your upfront costs are relatively inexpensive. It's the ongoing cost of maintenance that is where the commitment has to be made. So we were very upfront with that, with our community, with our council, and also with our officers, and really listened to their feedback. So just from my experience here, I would say here are my top 10 suggestions. Is involving everybody in the process, making sure everyone's voice is heard, because in the end that will help you to work on policy. It will help you to minimize some concerns that the officers may have, whether it's from a union standpoint or just from a call for service or a legal standpoint. The other thing is making sure that the people that you put on your team are specialists. So it was a core group of me and 3 other people. So I had a lieutenant who is very good with technology. We had our IT personnel, and then we also have a girl that does grant writing, so she helped out on the grant end, because that's the other stuff when it comes to doing the paperwork, especially when you're receiving a grant, to make sure that that's getting done and it's being done in a timely manner. So you can't do everything yourself. If you are the lead person, for me it's more communication with the chief, with the city council, with the community. So the really kind of technical day-to-day stuff, I would rely on my other teammates. Just making sure that you understand it's a long-term commitment. So once you get the body cameras, it's pretty hard to say, well, we just spent all this money and we don't really think it's a good idea. So just make sure that you know up front, and everybody knows up front, that it's a commitment, and it can be a very costly commitment. Doing a lot of research and education, we reached out to many different departments and talked to a lot of people, and once we were up and running with our program, we've received a lot of calls. We've had site visits from other departments, so just know that you will become probably the expert in your area, and so people will be looking to you for guidance. And so anything that we learned, we made it a point to share with other people, and we also appreciated the help that other agencies gave us as well. Test phase would be a very big thing too, because make sure that for us as administrators, when we deployed the body cameras, we did deploy, so the chief all the command staff, all sergeants, lieutenants have cameras, but it was the officers in the test group who picked the cameras. And so if you have a commitment to your officers, to tell them that we will purchase what you are suggesting, make sure that, you kind of keep to your word. So for us, it's unrealistic for me as an administrator who would wear my camera maybe 5% of the time to pick a camera. The other thing is you'll have a lot of questions from officers who may be skeptical, especially when it comes to discipline or how the video is going to be used, and even training. Some officers are nervous when you say, we're going to use your video for training in a roll call. Some officers are very happy, and they'll say, great, go ahead and use it. But some officers may not be as willing. So we actually put something in our policy that before we use the video for any type of training, we would have a conversation with the officer, because our intent is not to embarrass or ridicule. It's more for a learning experience. So there will be a lot of things that will come up that you won't even think about, but be open to the conversation and listen and be receptive. And lastly, making sure that your community knows what's going on, and also making sure that there's some type of implementation plan. Right now, it's really kind of things that, working with our state's attorney's office, we were ready to send video to them. They weren't ready to receive it. So you have to make sure you're working on other people's timelines as well, and be, accommodating to some of their internal practices, that you may be all ready to go and you have everything in place, but there may be a lot of different agencies who are not willing to move as quickly as you are. So thank you very much.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pat Rigdon. I'm a commander with the Colorado Springs Police Department. I'll just give you some background on our agency and where we're at with our program as well. So we have an agency of 684 sworn we've been working on body cameras similar to the other folks probably since the 2014 timeframe, and then with the BJA award, obviously got that process kicked into gear. We currently have 524 cameras on the streets. We were at in the 400s probably since April, recently added a few more, and so we're probably as close to full implementation as we've been. We might have a couple stragglers out there as well, but it's gone fairly well so far. I'll try not to be redundant and cover some of the things that the other two presenters have, but I can't guarantee that. So a couple of the things that we really learned was that communication is key to success in implementing a body-worn camera program. The BJA award actually did a great thing for us in that it forced us to have a great deal of community stakeholder input. And that kind of seems like a daunting task at first, but when we got going, it provided us such valuable insight as to what our community was expecting with the program that it helped us tailor things down the road, such as policy and just overall implementation the way that we did that. But in order to, a few key points in conducting community stakeholder input, you don't have to kind of go out and drum this up from scratch. I'm sure most departments have existing community groups that meet with the chief on a regular basis. We'll utilize those groups for one, just gain their input. But if you have a local university or college, we found that many times they're looking for a forum topic, something that they can host that students can attend. So we took advantage of that. We actually had a really healthy discussion in which we involved the ACLU, NAACP, and some victim advocacy groups into a discussion about how body-worn cameras should look in our community. And really what we learned from that was that no one's going to agree on that 100%. But we did look for some common themes that they all thought were good ideas and helped incorporate those into policy down the road. Special interest groups, one that was very successful for us was the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI. They provided us some very good insight on how they thought people experiencing mental illness might be impacted and actually react to body-worn cameras being present. So another success. And then finally, we sent out a survey, a public input survey, and got about 3,000 responses on it, where we asked some key questions about our policies around when officers should be able to view the video, certainly in critical incidents, when video should be released, and then when officers should be required to turn the camera on and off, those kind of things. And so once again, similar to the forum, we combed through those responses, found themes, and incorporated those into our policy to make a policy that's unique for us. Certainly just as important, and I would suggest doing this early on in the program, is reaching out to your criminal justice partners. It's actually phenomenal, the amount of data that goes downstream after it's recorded from the officer and how this impacts your district, state, municipal court attorneys and the volume of work that adds to their cases. I would get them involved early, outline the process. That was a big thing for us even when we went to RFP, I'll talk about in a minute, but it was finding a solution that allowed our criminal justice partners to access that data with a minimal impact on their staff and our staff. Even defense attorneys, we know they're impacted, so we crafted a training program and a system that allows them access into the system to pull their own data. And then ultimately neighboring agencies, if you have joint investigations, we have laws here now that require critical incidents like officer-involved shootings be at least jointly investigated by a neighboring agency or a criminal justice partner, so they're going to have to know how to manipulate our system and gain access to that data. So please include them in your discussions of what your program looks like. In crafting the RFP, and I'll say this and actually throughout your whole process, one of the big things we did that made our whole process work was we had a project manager involved early on. We have a person that works for our department that's actually a certified project manager, and that person is exceptionally organized, kept us all on task, established timelines, and really kept our process going. But she was integrally involved in the request for proposal process. Once again, we reached out to a number of stakeholders to help establish what we wanted to see in body cameras. Certainly, officers need to be involved, and it's probably the most important thing. But then you also have other segments of your department, records and ID, IT. I can't underemphasize IT because they will help establish what your infrastructure requirements are. And believe it or not, we found that we were woefully inadequate in the network capabilities that we needed to make the system work properly. And it was costly when we found out what those requirements were. But the sooner you know that, the more you can plan for that. And ultimately, your executive staff, your chief, your sheriff, what are their goals? What do they want to see in cameras? And that can help you pick a product that works best for you. Policy, so a lot of that was covered really by the previous two speakers, but by the time we got involved in this, I used the rip-off and duplicate method where I didn't really start from scratch. The body-worn camera toolkit had a multitude of great policy examples. I believe IACP had a model policy out there, so we looked at a lot of those and picked the segments of those policies that were really best for us, and picked and choose. So don't feel that you need to start from scratch on that. Anna mentioned involving unions, officer associations. We don't have a union here, but it was still important to involve the officer association that we have and hear their concerns, and once again start modeling our policy that meets the needs of everyone. You can't, I guess, bend to every wish on their behalf, but at the same time, at least they have a voice. And as I've already talked about, we use the stakeholder input to customize our policy that works for us. On rollout, a big suggestion that I have is that you have a documented lesson plan. This provides consistency for training throughout your agency, so you ensure that every officer is receiving the same information. Our training actually ended up only being about 3 hours, where we covered 1 hour of policy and 2 hours of device usage and kind of hands-on training. But it was adequate, got the job done. Similar to other agencies, we actually give a test to ensure that people are comprehending that information, and I think that protects the agency later on if a user argues that they didn't receive adequate training. We also started small. I'd highly suggest the test group. You work the bugs out of your system. Please use a varying level of tech savviness. I'm sure we, like most other agencies, have people that are highly capable in the realm of technology, and then you have people that really don't even like using a cell phone and don't adapt well to technology. But it's important, if you want a successful, consistent program, that everyone knows how to use the system, and you value the input of those low-end users as well. SMEs. So one thing that's been successful for us is in order to help manage the program in the field, we established people that were kind of the experts of the experts in each one of our substations, so, and on each shift. So if users had questions, they would go to the SME and figure out what that was, and that helped us cut down on the amount of time that we have a tech unit, the time that our tech unit was spending on body-worn cameras because they had other things to do. Other internal partners. So this is kind of easy to overlook, but you have to think about the number of folks that are going to have to touch this data kind of downstream. certainly detectives and investigators have to have their hands-on data for many criminal cases. But then you have records and ID people that might be fielding outside requests, the FOIA request type things. Internal affairs to investigate a complaint, something of that nature. I mean, evidence. The way that this works here in Colorado is all these videos generated are considered a criminal justice record. Most of them are evidence, and they have to be treated as such. So they have a role in managing the data as well. The public information officer, when you roll out a program, the media is going to be very interested. They're going to request video on a regular basis, so they have to be involved to help manage what we're going to release, when, and how. One suggestion I have is to audit your BWC usage. We've probably seen stories from around the country where agencies that have a program and then somebody gets into looking at it and, you know, there's a fairly low level of usage in the department, and then it kind of looks bad for that agency. I say that, but I also acknowledge that there's a big learning curve. This doesn't come supernatural. It's an absolute change in the way we do policing. So officers need some time to adjust, get used to using the equipment, and start using it on a consistent basis. I mean, some of that's just even muscle memory of remembering to turn the camera on. But one thing I look for is inconsistencies. So if I go to one particular patrol division in a shift and I see that I have an officer that's using, has recorded 2 videos in a week and for a total of like 30 minutes, and then I see another officer that's recording several hours of footage, there's something wrong there. And I need to reach out to maybe that underutilizing officer, find out if they're just not comfortable with the technology, what am I missing, and see if I can remedy that problem. For the most part, we have not treated that as a disciplinary situation to date. What I look for is if I have one officer that's repeatedly not using it correctly, and even after remedial training isn't, it certainly could become disciplinary, but I want it to be a positive experience for officers, and so far we really haven't gone down that road. As Anna, I believe, earlier mentioned, though, too, we also monitor our supervisors' use. This was a bit of a negotiation with our police association that we also didn't want supervisors out there headhunting. So we require their next level, which is the sergeant's next level is a lieutenant, to weekly look at their supervisors and make sure they're not just going in the system and watching endless hours of video in an attempt to, you know, catch Officer X in some sort of policy violation. So we've tried to keep it all on the up and up and make sure that this is positive for everyone. So finally, a couple of points. The biggest one is be patient. This always seems like it should be very easy to implement. It takes much longer than anticipated. But I think the important thing is that you get it right, rather than trying to get something out on the street very quickly, not have it be successful, and then have to redo it. I'd rather take the extra time and get it right the first time. Probably one of the big things is if you have an internal IT department, you're probably better off. But if you share one with the rest of the city, keep in mind that they don't have the same sense of urgency that the department has when talking about rolling out a project of this nature. Once again, in my opinion, that's where the project manager came in very handy, that our project manager held our IT folks to task, kept them on track, and made sure that everyone was on the same timeline. And then that's it for me, so I'll turn it back to you, Denise.
Thank you. All right, so we'll open it up to questions. Again, if you want to ask the question over the phone, press #6. If not, you can also click on the chat function to the right of your screen and ask questions directly to the host there. Again, so just opening it up. Anybody have any questions? Okay, Well, so we received a couple questions from folks as they registered. Now you can go ahead and state those now. The first question we got was, what were the most important criteria points in selecting a BWC vendor? So I'll open it up to Wayne or Pat or Anna if you want to take a stab at that question.
Yeah, and I'll kind of, for us, I mean, again, we're one of the smaller agencies with 182 officers, but one of the things that we looked at was we did a kind of a matrix for the vendors, and we were really kind of looking at durability, you know, functionality, battery life, also that they were able to support the back end, because some of the vendors do not have, we obviously have a cloud-based storage system, and some of the vendors would require an in-house storage. So we wanted to make sure that protocols were in place, that they were compliant with any federal guidelines regarding redundancy or anything that would, you know, storage backup. So we really focused on that, and then from the officer standpoint, it was more about functionality, durability, ease of use, activation, and then we kind of scored based upon the matrix. For us, that's kind of how we did it.
This is Pat Rigdon. I think the number one factor for me on selecting a vendor was the back end, the ease of data sharing. As I mentioned, we have a great relationship with our district attorney and public defenders, and we actually trained all their personnel in our system. So they go in and actually pull their own data. So we got by with only hiring 2 video evidence techs, we call them, that help manage the system and the data. And the rest of the pulling the data and using it for court purposes is all done by the courts and attorneys themselves. So that was a big success for us.
Yeah, Denise, this is Wayne also. That pretty much nailed it for us, too. I know just a couple other things. We relied heavily on the evaluations that we got from the officers that tested all the equipment, and we had tested 6 different vendors over a period of 6 months. And the other thing was we were really impressed with our vendors' digital evidence management system, the DEM system, that really, and the cloud system that they offered with it. That was a big selling point for us as well.
Great, thank you. Another question we got was, what were the top likes and dislikes of the implementation process?
For us, it was, for the likes of the implementation process, I think because we took our time, that we were prepared for any, as best as we could, anything that would come up. And so it seemed to really be kind of just part of the way we do business here. Our department is pretty progressive when it comes to technology, whether it's utilizing, you know, surveillance cameras, whether it's private or public, body cameras, drones. We're pretty, we're used to technology, but I think because we had talked about it so much, it really just came to the point where everyone was like, do we have these cameras yet? Just let's go with it. Dislikes, I think just it's very time-consuming, and you know, for the first couple of weeks when you really kind of start the rollout process, you will get a lot of questions, and if a camera fails, and making sure that you have staff 24/7 to respond to the needs of the officers, along with our state's attorney's office too. Once we did just start sharing evidence with them, making sure that someone was available to them as well.
This is Pat. I would say for us, and looking at this from the officer perspective, the actual ease of use of the device itself was a big hit. It was really relatively easy to tag and classify it. The one we have is automatic upload. But the product we chose actually required a uniform modification, and A, not super popular with all the officers, and B, logistically a very challenging task for us to get 500 officers completely re-outfitted with new uniforms. So that was probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I guess a couple of the likes for us in San Antonio was the training. We kind of took our time with it, kind of listened to some of the other projects we'd rolled out to see how the training should go. And like I said, we took our time with that. The other one was the disciplinary action because it was so new and we weren't quite sure, I mean, nobody really knew, how it was going to work. It's a new muscle memory game that you got to play, and just being able to activate and deactivate. It's not first thing on your mind. So disciplinary action was kind of laxed in the very beginning. Just it was used as more of like an educating type tool. Hey, you forgot to do this, or we need to work on this. The biggest dislike is not really something that you can get around. It was just, it's another tool added to your gun belt, so to speak, and it was just something else the officer had to concern themselves with. So it's kind of really one of the only dislikes we had. I mean, there's a lot of other little things too, but I think that's just officers being officers.
Thank you. We did get one question in our chat function. What issues were encountered going from the pilot phase to the full implementation phase?
For us, going from the pilot to the full implementation was, I think, making sure that officers were aware that they were on calls with other officers with body cameras, because we deployed in stages. And so, if we tried to hit every patrol shift with somebody who was part of the test phase, but sometimes if they were off and due to scheduling, they really never were on a call with someone with a camera. So I think finally, in having more cameras and introducing them into especially the patrol division, it was just one of those things where, everyone has cameras, and to be aware of the cameras. We, too, also took a more relaxed approach to discipline, and we're still kind of in that phase because we recognize that, obviously minor infractions such as language, it's going to happen, and just reassuring your officers that you're not looking to take a hard stance on it. So it was more of just getting used to, actions being recorded.
This is Pat. So a couple things there. If you're actually in the test phase of testing products, I found that was a little cumbersome because most products required, their vendor to come in and install software, and you had to have some different infrastructure needs. And if you tried to test, multiple products, it became a little bit difficult to keep everything straight and try to have the same officers test over and over. So that I found that a little difficult. Once we actually went into more of a pilot phase with the initial cameras, it was just, making sure, I think, that the officers were providing consistent input on what was working and what wasn't, so we could fix issues and move on to full implementation.
Yeah, I think here in San Antonio, one of the biggest problems we had, and I'm going to put it this way, we were so used to the in-car camera system with just a microphone and then the screen, obviously, that didn't leave the car. And it was so very different from the body-worn camera system that we got about 5 years later. It was almost like you had to unlearn what you learned with that system and learn something new with the body camera system. So even today, officers will refer to the body camera system as the vendor's name of the in-car system. So it's kind of that transition with the two different systems was and it still is a challenge for us. It's kind of overcoming that as an obstacle.
Great, thank you. So before I pass it off to BJ and Pat to close out the webinar, I wanted to thank our speakers. And again, if you guys have any questions, please send those to us, and we will go to respond. And if needed or if requested, we can pair you up with any of the speakers on today's webinar as well. All right, so Pat, do you want to provide a couple of closing remarks?
Sure, Denise. Let me begin by thanking both you and Dominique for helping set the webinar up. But Wayne, Anna, and Pat, you guys did a great job, and it's kind of interesting to see that, it's across from Texas to Illinois to Colorado. Just a lot of good insights that are very tangible from the work. So I applaud the leadership you guys are playing for your departments, and appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us today. One thing I want to share, we do an analysis, as you can imagine, of our programs here at BJA, and we call it grant stat and we've taken the body-worn camera program through that process, and CNA is part of that, along with our other colleagues here at BJA. But it made me think of something that I summarized that last analysis, and I think you can all relate to, traditionally when sheriffs and chiefs, would be asked by a community member or a colleague, what are the main challenges? And oftentimes that quote, well, it's kind of gangs, guns, and drugs, which we all know is a key challenge. But the BJA law enforcement team hosted a meeting about a year and a half ago with a lot of leaders that were kind of in the middle management, kind of forward-thinking folks, and it really did raise kind of the appreciation of forward-thinking officers that today, rather than just gangs, guns, and drugs, thinking about that from a tactical perspective perhaps, but looking at kind of a shift in paradigm that facing challenges, that different lens, it's really based on three things. One, strategic thinking or strategic solutions. Two, community engagement. And three, fostering a culture that embraces innovation and change. And for those agencies, like we've heard from today, and folks that are listening to the webinar, what we have found, those agencies that have worked with BJA and have received grants, gone through this exercise of evaluating and updating their policy and programs and training, that methodology really serves you not just in the body-worn camera arena. We've had officers tell us that they use that exact formula to solve whatever issue that they're dealing with, whether it's use of force issues, human trafficking, substance abuse, drug policy. So it's a credit to the work that you guys are doing and the folks listening on the phone. And we hope that, again, that formula of strategic thinking and solutions combined with community engagement and trying to foster that culture that embraces innovation and change is just a winning combination. So thanks to everybody on the line today.
Thank you, Pat. So a couple things before we close. Don't forget to complete the webinar evaluation. Again, that feedback is very important for us in producing additional webinars. And again, if you have any questions or need anything else from us, we provide an extensive amount of resources on our website. It's www.bwctta.com. And we've also included a link to the toolkit on this last slide for you. Again, thank you for everybody joining us on this webinar. Thank you.